Well, fuck. That's not gonna work. Hi, welcome back to Frazzle Dad's Minis. I'm Jim, Frazzle Dad, and today let me introduce you to a toddler that is visiting my home for a little bit. Okay, so it's not exactly a toddler. This is the incredible model from the Kickstarter Cthulhu Death Must Die, specifically the Riley Rising add-on. I'm putting this thing down. So there's a story behind how I got this big beast. I backed the Kickstarter maybe 3 years ago. CMON, which I didn't know at the time, isn't great about executing on Kickstarters. There's been a lot of delays. I just sort of ignored it. And quite frankly, had gotten to the point where I've forgotten when stuff was going to ship and even what I ordered as part of that Kickstarter. I'd just thrown it off in the back, kind of like KDM Kingdom Death Match. If it showed up, it was going to be a bonus. So I'm off in the mountains for a week of vacation off the grid. When I get back on the grid, I'm driving home and get an email that something has arrived at home from my Kickstarter. And I'm like, oh, I totally didn't realize something was shipping because I'd ignored stuff. I pull up to the house and there's a 3-foot box, 3-foot cube on the front stoop. And I'm like, this must have been a major shipment of like a bunch of game bits that I didn't realize. And I opened it up and I was like, holy fuck. I had no idea that this add-on that I'd ordered was this big. I thought it was like an 8-inch or maybe a 12-inch deal. Yeah, totally missed the thing that it is literally 2 foot tall. Anyway, lots of laughter. Thought that was pretty dang funny. It is an amazing model. The level of detail on it is just insane. There are literally, because I did some area estimation, 200 pustules on the skin and the flesh, and that sounds gross, and it's meant to be. It's really disconcerting. The face is extraordinary, and you'll see that. There's 6 eyes that are fun to detail, and these tentacles that hang out. The wings are like these rotting pieces. And then, oh my God, the runes or insignia on the stone pillars are just extraordinary. And everything is crisp and well done. I had a friend on one of the Discord servers that I'm on ask me, so is it harder or easier to paint because of the size? I said, yes, because it's both. It's harder because there's just so freaking much to do. The base alone, like I'm not even talking the pillars, the base just requires a lot of texturing and detailing. The 200 pustules, right? I touched each one of those, I think, 7 times. Primer, base coat, getting the initial red into the inside, getting a bit of highlight on there, highlighting around the edge, dry brushing the outside. So in some ways, everything's extraordinarily tedious because you've got to do it for an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 for every single task. But the cool thing is, it's so big that I'm not having to struggle with, 28 or 32 millimeter minis to get some amazing results. So it's been a whole lot of fun. 2 things before I carry on with this. First, I will probably do this in 2 segments because the thing is so freaking big. There's so much content. It is so big, I had to rework my entire workspace to actually film this because the overhead view just, did not freaking work. Secondly, if you get through the videos that I make on this and you find the piece interesting, I am open to selling this. Don't know how much, but if you're interested in buying this, drop me a note in the comments, and we can open up a conversation. I want to enjoy it for a little bit, but then I'd be happy to sell it to somebody who would like to have it around. If you think you're interested, let me know in the comments. But regardless, let's get started. This was a lot of fun to work on. This thing's so huge that priming, zenithal, and then even the initial base coat, there's just no question I was going to use rattle cans. So I've already got this primed and some zenithal on there. I'm using Rust-Oleum primer and then spray. Rust-Oleum's a good product and it's doing real well. So I'm just trying to get some basic texture and highlighting on here, and then I'll move on to get the actual sort of base coat applied. So I've been working on the green for a bit, trying to get his skin covered. The thing's so huge that trying to get up into all the nooks and crannies is a bit of a challenge, but using a darker base coat, primer really helps out. I started out with black primer and then kind of worked up gray and zenithal from there. So this is just going ham with rattle and, working on the massive amount of surface area. You can see that I also put on a bit of zenithal highlight with some white over the green. That'll give me a nice base for moving forward. Here I'm using some Vallejo red and Warlord purple, and for the larger pustules, I'm just shooting a blast in with my airbrush. There's so many to do that, and some of the pustules are really quite sizable, so it's really easy for me to just kind of zap a bit into a bunch of the different pustules and kind of get a bunch of the work done. I'm also using a cloth to wipe out where I miss and kind of overshoot. This is just the start of that tedious work that I mentioned, but man, is it paying off because it looks really sharp. Apologies for the really poor video quality here. I'm shooting out in my garage. The thing's so big I can't use my normal camera placement. I'm even having to use my iPhone. It's just kind of it's just part of the hysterical thing of trying to work on this. Anyway, I hope you're getting something out of the video by watching me airbrush, even though it's not great video. Thanks for your patience. One of the things I love about oil paints is using them as a wash. I did this on that dragon that I mentioned earlier. There's something about putting a dark red over green that really makes flesh look nice and sickly. It seeps into all the cracks and crevices, and just the effect is awesome. So I'm looking through several of my oil paints here, trying to figure out which one I like, and I finally settle on, I think, M. Graham Maroon Perylin. If you haven't used oil washes before, you scrape some out into some type of little cup or whatever, add in a whole bunch of white spirits. You want a very thin mix, stir it up really, really well, and then you just start slopping it on. You can see I'm using some gloves here. Believe me, it gets messy, particularly when you're wiping stuff off. So I've got a pipette that I use as well to get white spirit out. Again, you're going to want this very, very, very thin. The first time you do it, I encourage you play around with it either on a separate model or someplace that you can experiment and learn. It's not hard. You just need to fool around and probably make it much thinner than you think. One critical note that I should have said earlier, but you'll notice that the model looks very shiny. That's because I sprayed it with a gloss varnish, not matte, but gloss. When you're doing an oil wash, you really want the wash to be able to kind of move across the surface and get into all those nooks and crannies. And a gloss, not a matte, really helps that handle. So you can see that I'm slathering stuff on here. I am finding that the initial mix was too thick, so I'm adding in even more white spirit and getting started with that again. So what you do with the washes is you slather it on, you let it dry for 15, 30 minutes. You'll have to play around with your own setup. And then I'm going to come back and sponge it off. But in the meantime, I have to give this big beast a oil bath across his entire gross pustulant body. As I'm blasting through here, one thing to keep in mind, you want to try to make sure that you're getting that wash into all the nooks and crannies. You're going to wipe it off of the high points. You want to make sure that you're really spreading it into the creases, into the folds, into places where you want that color to pop. Now it's time to scrub off that oil wash from the high points. And I'm using makeup remover foam wedge thingies. I've got a link to them, affiliate link in the description, but this is messy, and this is where the gloves are really important. What you're trying to do is wipe it off of all of the high points and leave that intense color down in the folds. So it's really like an acrylic wash, but the gloriousness of oil paints is their rich pigment, so it changes everything. You'll need to kind of play around with your own environment and figure out how thick you make the wash. Again, go thinner than you think you might need. How long you leave it dry makes a difference. You can also dab on some white spirits onto the sponge to get more aggressive about how much you pull off. So really, it's a matter of kind of playing around with how much you're leaving on, how much you're pulling off. It's not the end of the world. If you need to, you can go back and, add some more wash to places you miss. I had to do that with a couple spots on this model. But just keep after it. Get the wash off and bask in the gloriousness of what you've done. Washes are wonderful. Finished off the oil wash, and there's a couple important process things to keep in mind. You need to be patient, which for me absolutely sucks. But you need to let that oil wash, after you've wiped everything off, you need to let the model sit for at least a day, more likely 2, potentially even 3 or 4, depending on the environment. Oil takes a very long time to dry, and you want that to dry and cure and be completely hard. I rubbed my hand over the model a couple times over the space of 2 days and was still getting a little residue from that wash off. That means it has to dry and cure more. Once it's completely cured, again, sometimes you just got to set it aside for 3, 4, 5 days. Once it's completely dry and cured, then you want to cover it with some matte varnish. Not gloss in this case, but matte. And that will seal in all of that oil, because you can't paint acrylic over oil. You need a varnish in place. So I just used Rust-Oleum matte. Might have used Krylon, one of the two. Anyway, just a good sealer. Let that cure for, a day or so, because you want a nice hard shell, and then you can move on to working again with acrylics. The varnish layer has hardened. Obviously, all the oil stuff is hardened and cured. Now I'm running around and just touching up and filling in any pustules that I missed. And I'm using a combination of different paints here, Warlord Purple, Red, and then on some of the bigger ones, I'm using some of Pro-Acryl's Transparent Red to kind of give it a wet, grody, gross feeling. This is just a lot of detailed, tedious work here, filling in and on occasion wiping off the rim when I got a little sloppy with my brush control. Lots of work here. Here I'm using Broken Anvil Green number 2 for dry brushing. I tend to use a somewhat damp, very lightly damp brush. I'll scrub the paint off on a dry brush palette scrubber, I don't know, whatever they call it. And I'm trying to be very light, but get enough paint down. And this higher color of green really makes things pop because I've got that deep wash that made everything down, brought the tones down and put all that lovely all the lovely red into the recesses. This dry brushing is a really effective way of making things pop. Here I'm working on highlighting the rims of all the pustules. So I'm using Broken Anvil's Green number 3. There's some weird consistency to this paint. It turns out to be almost more of a glaze. It picks up a whole lot of liquid, even straight from the wet palette. But that's actually working out well because as it dries, it brings down the tone a little bit. And I'm not using the right terms, but I'm not a great painter and I don't know all the details. Anyway, so I'm just running around the lip of each of the pustules, all 200 of them, to put this additional little bit of detailing on there. And I'm really happy with how it's making things pop. So I've got everything masked up. I used aluminum foil. I used the awesome AK camo masking to get around the tentacles. And now I'm spraying on some wine red. My big fat head is in the way. Sorry about that. Again, this is a difficult position to try to get in the garage. I get the best I can. Anyway, wine red is glorious, and I really thought that would be a good color for the tentacles. So it's just a matter of working to get that coverage on there. There's a lot of goofy angles on the tentacles, so it's a matter of manipulating the airbrush around as much as I can to get the best coverage. So I'm back in after spray painting and I'm just catching some touch up. I'm getting places where I missed with the masking, both on the tentacles, and then I'm starting to do a bit of touch up where needed with some mix of Broken Anvil miniature paints from their Kickstarter to try to catch some of the green skin areas that I may have missed. So there you have it. I've gotten through a number of phases on this. The priming, some zenithal, the base coats with rattle cans, and a whole lot of detail work. That oil wash, I'm really pleased with how that turned out, and I'm happy with my progress so far. Let me know what you think in the comments. By all means, if you're not already, kindly subscribe and give me a like. Helps with the algorithm. I'm a tiny channel and every bit of exposure helps. I don't really have like a grand reveal piece, but here's a shot of kind of the current state where I'm leaving off with this video. Until next time, by all means, be careful about what you back on Kickstarter, but more importantly, experiment, have some fun, learn some things. Remember, at the end of the day, it's just paint and plastic. And sometimes it's a lot of that. Bye, folks.